Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. This is Mr. Rowe. This is Intermediate Algebra, Part A, Lesson 19. We're going to look at how to graph a linear inequality from a standard form equation, or standard form inequality. So let's take a look. Background stuff, one more time. We've got two different line types we want to talk about here in this lesson. First line type, if you have greater than or less than, those will be dashed lines. And then if you have greater than or equal to or less than or equal to, those are going to be solid lines. And then we'll talk about that more as we go through the lesson, but just beware. You've got to make sure you look at the line type when you make your graph. Shading, we also have to shade. So once you draw a line, you will have to shade the correct top of the graph. So that's the two things that after you graph correctly, if you don't have these, then you haven't completed the process. So you got to have the correct line type and the correct shading. And we'll talk about shading as we go through these. So here is our first example. This is x plus y less than or equal to -2. Now, you've got some options. If you want to change this to slope-intercept form, that's great. I wouldn't suggest it, but you can do that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to use a little technique that we taught you in an earlier lesson about finding the x and y intercepts. So for just a second, I am going to ignore this part of the inequality, and I am going to just take this part, and instead of using the inequality symbol, I'm going to use equals, and that is my x-intercept. So I can plot a point on the x-axis at -2, and that is my x-intercept. Okay, now I can do the same thing for y. All right, so for just a second, I'm going to ignore that this exists. And I'm going to take the y, and it's going to equal -2. So that is my y-intercept. And we'll get a little more complicated with these in just a minute, but for right now, this was just an easy example. And so I can put a point at -2 on the y-axis. Now, all I've got to do is draw this line, making sure I have the correct line type. Well, this is a solid line. And so I can just draw that line straight through those points. And there you go. There's my line. I missed just a little bit, but you get the idea. It should go through that point as well. Let me take that off and let me try to redo it. I'll try to do it freehand with my hand instead of doing the... This is the one downfall of doing this method is you don't get a lot of points to draw your line, but you know, again, this is a sketch. It's not 100%. So there's your line. So as long as I've got those two x and y intercepts plotted, I'm going to give you credit because I know what technique you were trying to do. And so now we need to shade the correct side of the line. If you watched my previous recording on this, I talked about how you can use this to help you shade. We don't want to try to use that for this. We are going to want to test a point every single time because most of the time you'll get the right answer if you use that technique, but sometimes we won't. So we're going to test, and we're going to test the easiest point we can find. 0, 0 is available, so I'm going to test 0, 0. And if this is the first video you're watching, you're testing a point. You pick a point on the graph. You test it in the given inequality. So we're going to test 0 plus 0 because that's the order pair I'm using, 0, 0. And we're going to test to see if it's less than or equal to -2. So is 0 less than or equal to -2? Well, no, it is not. So that means that my shading will not occur on that side of the line. I will shade the opposite side of the line. So I will shade on the opposite side. So that's how you decide where to shade, by testing a single value that's obviously not on the line. So there you go. So that's the first example. Let's take a look at this next example. We're going to use the same technique here. So we're going to start off by ignoring that this exists. So we're going to forget about that for just a second. We're going to take the x, and I'm going to get a point of x equals -6 for my x-intercept. So I'm going to plot -6 on the x-axis right there. Now, I'm going to take this, and I'm going to forget that that exists now. And so I'm going to take -3y equals -6, and I'm going to solve for y. Divide by -3. You notice I don't worry about the inequality sign when I do this. So my x-intercept will be +2. So I'm going to plot a point at +2 on the y-axis. And now I'm going to draw my line. Now, because the inequality is just less than, that means that my line has to be dashed. So I'm drawing a dashed line, just like that. And because I plotted those points, I'm going to get credit for the right line. Remember, this is just a sketch. And then I'm going to test a point. Well, 0, 0 is not, it is a available point. It's not on the line, so I'm going to use 0, 0 test. So is 0 minus 3 times 0 less than -6? So is 0 less than -6? Well, no, it is not. So that means that I can't shade this side because I got a false statement. So I got another false statement. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to shade the other side of the line. So I'm going to shade here again. So see why it's important not to just try to use the inequality when it's not in, when it's in standard form. So there you go. So here's another example. Same technique. I am going to ignore, I don't want a highlighter, I want the pen back. I am going to ignore this for just a second. That doesn't exist. I'm going to take 2x. It's going to equal 10. I'm going to divide by 2 to get x equals 5. So that is my x-intercept. So I'm going to plot a point on x at 5. And now, just like I've done before, I'm going to move this, and I'm going to ignore that the x part exists. And technically what I'm doing there is I'm letting that equal 0. So I'm not using some fuzzy math here to figure this out. I'm just taking a step away that you don't need. So we've got -5y equals 10. So I'm going to divide by -5. And so y will equal -2. So -2 on the y-axis is my y-intercept. And again, remember, as long as we got these 2 points, I'm going to give you credit for the line, but I have to see that you plotted those 2 points. Otherwise, I'm going to start checking slopes and other things like that. And then you're going to have to make sure you do it right. So now this is a solid line through those 2 points. So I'm going to draw a, and that's too thick there. Move that down. So I'm going to draw a line through those 2 points. And it's solid because of the equal sign. And again, I'm going to test a point. I'm going to test 0, 0, so I need that back now. So is 2 times 0 minus 5 times 0 greater than or equal to 10? Well, 0 is not greater than 10, so I cannot shade on that upper portion. I have to shade this lower portion. So remember, you only shade where there is a true statement. So again, it's very important on these that you test. Okay, so here, the last two, these are the ones where you have just a single variable. Remember, single variable functions are either horizontal or vertical lines. Y equals a number is a horizontal line. X equals a number is a vertical line. So since this is y is greater than 4, I know that y equals 4 is a horizontal line through y equals 4. So I'm going to go to y equals 4. And I'm going to draw a dashed line. So I'm not going to use that tool because it doesn't do dashed. So I'm going to draw a dashed line through y equals 4. And now here I can use the inequality. It says that y has to be greater than 4. So I know I have to shade the top portion. So these are actually fairly easy as long as you understand what x equals and y equals lines looks like. And we talked about those in a previous lesson. So last one, what if we have x equals or x is greater than -2? So again, we find -2, and this will be a vertical line. And again, it's dashed. So I'm going to draw a dashed line through -2. And again, I can use the inequality this time. It says that x has to be greater than -2, so I'm going to shade this portion of the graph. So I hope this helps you graph the inequalities in their standard form. I think this is 6 through 8 in the lesson. If you're still struggling with these, please let me know in a teacher message. Make that appointment for a help session. I can walk you through several of these until you get the hang of it. So let me know if you need help.